A few years back, a good buddy of mine and I went hunting in the woods when we encountered an animal I never thought would exist. This creature, being roughly 7 to 8 feet tall and weighing probably around 500 pounds. I also noticed, as dog-like as it was, it didn't have a tail. It had a human-like face, but the eyes had this dark reddish glow to them and looked like it was ready to pounce on us at any given moment. The first encounter with this animal happened when I fired my first shot of the day after seeing what happened to be an 8-point buck standing in some bushes, approximately only 40 yards away. After walking towards the area, we found nothing but broken branches and leaves where the creature was standing, which made me believe that I might have just been seeing things. However, after we made our way out back towards our truck, we heard footsteps that sounded like something much larger than your average deer. My friend and I then started looking around, finding some large tracks in the mud which looked like something I had never seen before. We then decided to find a place where we could stay safe, preferably our tree stand. After spending about another hour or so in our stand, waiting for the stand to go, we decided that now was the best time to start heading back to our truck, which was parked close by. As my buddy and I were walking away from our stand, we turned around, only to see this 8-foot-tall creature with no tail very close behind us, the same creature I just described to you. My friend yelled at me saying, "Run." And as we both picked up our pace, running into the woods, until finally finding yet another spot for us to hide safely, because, let's be honest, this thing was gaining on us, and we were not in enough shape to outrun it. Whatever it was fast, and we could hear this thing trailing us very quickly. But after a while, it seemed to stop. I think we were downwind from it, enough to where maybe it lost our scent. Fortunately, afterwards, we were able to make it away from this thing and back towards up where the truck was parked. But we ran into one more thing before leaving that day. After packing up our stuff and meeting back at the truck, we noticed this large mound close by. We decided to inspect. No, this is what I suspect and am no way 100% sure. And don't get me wrong, we were ready and willing to get out of there, but something just drew us to this mound. Like this energy. I don't know how else to describe it. Judging by how this mound was made and dug out, I'm pretty sure that whatever that large thing was that was following us that day lived in it. The smell that emitted from it was the exact same awful odor that followed this creature around. That's just one of the ways we knew it was close by. It was an odor I describe as rotting meat and wet dog mixed together, but more pungent and wild smelling. It also made me wonder if it was maybe a den to this creature. After returning home, I tried to do some research, and I found out that Dogman, or what's called as the Michigan Howler, is a possible undiscovered canine in North America. Sightings dating back to Native Americans. The Dogman has been seen more frequently in northern Michigan, which is why some people believe it may have actually originated there. According to the stories, this creature resembles a man, but also had the ability to take on this animalistic form, described as large wolf-like creatures, around 7 feet tall with strong limbs and long hair all over their bodies. The reports that I've read describe this creature as very identical to what we saw that day. I don't believe in werewolves, and that's not what I believe what we saw. But I know we saw something that is completely out of the ordinary in every sense of the word. I'm a paranormal investigator, and I have a pretty terrifying Dogman encounter story I would like to share with you. This one was shared with me. I'll keep the person's identity anonymous. For the time being, we'll call this individual Bill. I have a friend, Bill. He called me and told me that he had an experience with something he believes was a Dogman. He claims that it apparently happened around 20 or so years ago in the woods of West Virginia. He said that he met two friends at his trailer where they were going to go and smoke some weed before heading into the woods for a hike. Of course, they were about 18, 19 at this point. Bill said as soon as they lit up a joint, one of his friends yelled, "What's that?" pointing to this large black creature running in the distance on two legs, holding its arms out from its body, as if wading through the thick brush. Bill described it as looking like half dog, half ape, or half ape, half dog, half man. Very long, slender arms, and just a very large head. It filled their vision until it disappeared behind trees about 100 or so yards away. Now, soon after this encounter, Bill said he heard what sounded like a dog yelping, but the barking sounded very deep. It felt as if there was a lot of them, and they were getting closer. Bill says that they all became scared at this point and began huddling together. He described himself as crying in fear during the encounter, and a few minutes later, he noticed that his other friend was gone. Bill said when he asked where his friend went, one of the others pointed to a nearby bush, calling him by name. At first, they thought it was a prank, but then they looked, and they noticed blood, and that's when they also noticed two eyes looking back at them. These yellow golden eyes that looked like a ravenous wild animal. They ran for their car, leaving their friend behind. Of course, his fate they would soon discover. This was their last encounter with that creature. But on the way out, they noticed, running alongside them, were what Bill claims are about 7 or 8 of these dog-like creatures, about 6 feet tall, long black fur, very bold ape-like heads, snouts, and dog-like ears. When he made it home, Bill and friend called the police immediately. And since their friend disappeared, it was immediately investigated. It turns out that Bill's friend's body was found in the general area, torn to pieces. The police, after taking statements from Bill and friend, came to the conclusion that it must have been a wild animal, and that it was clearly a bear that killed Bill's friend. There wasn't much left of his friend, which is why they wrote it down on paper as a bear attack, since in this area of the woods, there had been large black bears spotted before. However, we both know from doing all these stories that black bears, or bears in general, don't kill like this. This is another classic case of the police and local law enforcement doing everything they can to quickly and efficiently cover up the case. After speaking to Bill on the phone, he seemed incredibly humbled and wanted no notoriety from this story. He's an older guy now, in his early 40s. Being as genuine as he is, I see no reason for him to make this story up. He even told me afterwards, the police wondered if he had a part to play in his friend's death, but they can never find any concrete evidence proving otherwise, linking him to the death. The only reason Bill reached out to me, it's because we have mutual friends, and he figured it would get it off his chest if he talked to somebody about it. He's been living with this for a long time. He has not told any family members, and not even his wife about it. Nobody would believe him. He gave me full permission to share this story, as long as I keep his identity anonymous and refer to him exclusively as Bill. Just so you know, this story sounded kind of strange to me at first, so I asked him in person more about it, and he claims that as they were looking at this thing, his friend just kind of disappeared, and after a few minutes when they looked, one of these creatures must have jumped on him and pulled him into the bush without ever hearing anything. At least that's the gist I got out of speaking to Bill. Anyway, feel free to share this story with your audience, and just know these creatures can be incredibly dangerous and kill when they want to. While I was visiting friends in Jacksonville, Florida, I had an encounter with some sort of upright walking canid creature that has shaken me. While I was at a friend's place, I stepped outside to have a quick cigarette. Quick note, my friend lives right next to the Everglades, so it's pretty dark out and pretty wild. His house is at the very end of the plot development, Anyway, this creature walked right past me, about 50 feet away in the yard. I was instantly scared for my life. The thing kind of looked over in my direction, but I don't think it noticed me. It let out this low grunt and kept on going. Immediately, I noticed it had long dark brown hair on the top of its head, legs, and back. The creature stood upright, ran on 2 legs out into the woods, with an appearance or speed that was not normal for anything walking or standing up. I've never had a heartbeat so hard and fast in my chest, and for 2 weeks, I couldn't sleep right, thinking about what I saw. Was it an actual creature or animal that I never knew existed? If any of you have ever seen the movie Wolfman, then this is exactly how this thing reminded me of. Funny enough, the movie rendition made me think of early conceptualizations for furries. This whole incident lasted no longer than 30 seconds, from seeing it to it disappearing into the woods. It seemed like it was on a mission. I don't think it even noticed I was there, due to the way the porch light was positioned. It startled me at first. I thought it was somebody in a costume, until I got a good look at this thing. And even in the dark, I realized there is no way this was a person. Taking a quick glance at this thing's features, there's no hiding that this was some sort of upright walking dog, although I never heard of one before. It had great strides and seemed to be moving very quickly, or moving away from something coming from the direction it was. It paid no attention to my direction at all, even though it was partially illuminated by the faint porch light. Enough that I could see some details to kind of make out what it was. Completely shaken by this sighting, I immediately put out my cigarette, walking back inside. My friends noticed I was kind of pale looking. They wanted to know if I was okay. I told them I was just peachy and went straight to bed. They were trying to get me to hang out longer and have a few drinks, but I just wanted to lay down in the dark alone. So after about 30 minutes, I decided that I should get back up. I was going to spend the night there anyway. So I sat down and asked my friend about creatures out here, but he looked at me strangely. He said this was the first time he's heard of anything like what I saw. He told me there are animals that have been spotted by locals that look weird, but nothing like what I described. I think he was more playing it off like it was a joke or something and not actually serious. I just tried to play it off because there's no way I could tell him fully that this was what I suspect to be an 8-foot-tall creature. This was easily one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. It's something that has completely freaked me out. I mean, it's not like you can talk about these things without looking crazy, am I right? I think it's because all these sightings are starting to pop up now. It seems like they're everywhere, especially around the fall. I've seen a lot of the same stuff posted now by other people in the past year or so. A lot of posts on Reddit and other places. Now, a lot of them aren't as detailed as me, because these things can get pretty scary. I understand that. Also, maybe they were not sure what it was, and just thought it might have been their imagination running wild. But there's no way an imagination could come up with what I saw. Oh, and one last note. This was in October of last year, 2020. I will never forget the first time I saw him. I know that probably sounds like the opening line from some cheesy love story, but if anything, this was my very first sighting, and it was right around 3 years ago. It was just a regular night, no full moon or mysterious storm, but I would have usually been tucked up in bed, asleep, next to my girlfriend. The reason I was in the woods, rather than my bedroom, was we had just had a major bust-up. When that happens, I need to head out and blow off some steam for a bit. So, I'd headed down to the woods to calm down by walking, just about in the dark. It relaxes me. Now, I'm a big guy, and it's been a few years, but I played ball in high school, and I've remained somewhat fit. I wasn't worried about being jumped, although I'm sure there are gangs out here, even in the middle of the night. but the town we live in isn't exactly rife with gangs. I feel like I can hold my own if necessary. I've been in these woods hundreds of times before. As a kid, we used to play out here for hours. And as a teen, we had parties and made out with cheerleaders. And as an adult, well, it's where I had to pace about and calm myself down. And all the times I've been out there, I've never felt uneasy. I could sense something wasn't right. But your imagination doesn't just jump straight away to a monster when you're an adult. I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched. However, since it was the woods and nighttime, it was perfectly within reason that I was being watched by all the bunnies and woodchucks and deer that live there and were thinking, "Hey dude, what are you doing on our turf?" But it felt, well, different. More menacing, I guess. Like something predatory was watching and waiting. At that point, I wouldn't say that I was scared or even anxious because I didn't think for one moment there actually was something there that could be potentially harmful. We don't exactly have grizzlies or wolves roaming around here freely, and although there were some raccoons and feral cats that could potentially tear up your garbage, I was pretty sure I would be able to hold my own. I was actually kind of curious and, to be honest, then I saw the shape. That's the best way I can describe it, as it wasn't a shadow since there was not enough light. More like a dark mass that was very much a solid thing. I just couldn't tell what, but I can tell you that it was big. At least my height and size, and for a second, I even wondered if it could possibly be some real weird trick of the darkness, and it was somehow my reflection. Even that was crazy. Then, it moved forward, closer to me, and I could see more of it, hear this low rumbling growl it was making. The smell. The wet dog was literally the first thing that came to mind. One of my buddies had a dog that loved jumping in lakes and came out stinking. This was very similar to the foul scent that I smelt. Also, added in rotting meat. I could also see more than just an outline too. It was indeed similar in size to me, but apart from me, also standing on two legs. That was where the similarity ended. You see, this guy was covered in hair all over his body. Thick but short. Not like some hairy dude at the gym. This was like fur. Like thick, coarse fur. Then there was the head. There was nothing even remotely human about the head. It was indeed 100% canine. Specifically, what I would say was German Shepherd. The kind of dog cops sometimes use in the canine units. That was enough for the first sighting. I turned around and ran back to my apartment, hoping my girlfriend had calmed down or fallen asleep. I didn't really think too much about it over the next few months. I know that might sound weird, but I have a super stressful job. Things were definitely not great in my relationship, so that kept my mind busy, and I didn't really even find time to do anything other than work, eat, and sleep. Then we had another major fight. This one would be the last, as we broke up after, but she locked me out, and I found myself once more heading to the woods just to walk around, trying not to punch stuff. And I remember being livid, and I start to even remember back, but I couldn't remember back to the strange encounter. Then, that wet dog smell hit me again, and it all came rushing back. Although this time, he or it was closer, and I got a real good look at the muscles underneath all that fur. He was literally body-wise like a man. His arms were maybe longer than a regular person, and he for sure seemed to have claws on the ends of his fingers and toes, but otherwise, a very similar proportion to a human. Again, since it was so dark, I hadn't noticed the blood to start with, but I suddenly saw it on his face and looked down to see a half-eaten rabbit in his hands. I'm not usually squeamish, but it was enough to turn my stomach, and I ran before I could join that bunny. He didn't chase me. I haven't seen him maybe 5 or 6 more times. Each time, I become a little less afraid. However, I won't ever let my guard down. He hasn't tried to attack me, but we're not going to be best friends either. I don't know if anybody else around here has seen him. I've never heard of any stories or rumors, but I won't tell, unless kids start to go missing or something messed up like that. But for now, he seems content by eating the creatures, like rabbits and deer. I wonder why he doesn't get so pissed with me being around. Either way, I feel like it's one of those mutual things where I respect his territory, and he leaves me alone. I don't know. Maybe that'll change. Maybe I'm just a prey, waiting to be pounced on. Since what happened to me, I've been doing a lot of reading and research, and to be honest with you, it seems a lot of people have innocent, or even, I guess, friendly encounters with these creatures. Maybe I was just unlucky, or maybe those stories are BS, and I experienced the real thing. I live alone in a big old farmhouse that has been in my family for years. One day, I'd like to fill it with a husband and lots of kids, but for now, it's just me and my dog, Pippa. On the night in question, Pippa was at the animal hospital, recovering from surgery. She was almost 10, and it was the first night I had ever been away from her. I couldn't sleep that well, but I was sat up in bed reading, trying to force myself to drift off when I heard the noise. I remember looking at the alarm clock. It was now close to 2 a.m. Now, I am pretty much on my own, in the way of neighbors out here too. The next farm is at least a mile away, and I don't tend to get anyone just passing by in the daytime, dropping in, let alone in the middle of the night. So it's not like it's if you live in the city, and there's this constant hub of activity, aside from animals. I don't tend to hear anything at night either. To start with, I actually thought that maybe I missed Pippa so much, I was just imagining the sound of her scratching at the back door. But the scratching was quickly replaced by something that I knew I wouldn't manifest from wanting to see my dog. I heard the door open. Now, like a lot of people out there, I don't lock my doors as there's no point. There's nobody around me, and I live so far out. Who's going to bother me? If they did, I have nothing worth stealing. Plus, as well as being my best friend, Pippa is protective of me and a great guard dog. I reach down under my bed where I can grab my shotgun. I might leave my door unlocked, but everybody out here is armed. More in case something gets in the chicken coop. But I always sleep with it, within arm's reach, just in case. I had just gotten hold of it when I heard this growl. It was similar to when Pippa had sensed something on the land, like a ferret who are nasty little critters. They rip off chickens' heads and drink their blood. This was a much deeper and coarser growl, and my dog wasn't there. I had in mind maybe it was a coyote or a wolf, because, wolves are well known for being able to turn handles and open doors. Not like a person, but they're smart. They can figure it out. Still, I was scared and I had the gun aimed at the door, ready, grateful for the fact that I had been reading and my bedside lamp was on. The house is all one level, but sprawling, so although I could hear the door since the night was so still, my room was the furthest point. I wondered if I should get out of bed and position myself by the door before I can make a decision. The bedroom door flies open, and there it stood. Now, I'm not much of a horror movie fan, but one Halloween, back in high school, my date took me to the drive-in where they were showing American Werewolf in London. The thing stood looking at me now. Wasn't dissimilar from that, although his head looked more like a Doberman Pinscher than a wolf. But otherwise, it was definitely a man-dog rather than a man-wolf. A very human-shaped body, covered in long, dark, matted fur, and the head of a dog. It looked right at me, and I know it was a he, if you catch my drift. He bared his teeth, growling and snarling, and sometimes actual dogs do that when they are scared as a defense mechanism. You can usually tell by looking into their eyes if they're putting on a brave face or if they're actually wanting to attack. Although I wasn't close, I could tell from his eyes that he meant business. This was a full-on assault, and if I didn't act fast, God only knows what it might try to do to me. With that in mind, I took the shot and blasted a hole straight through this thing's shoulder. I was aiming for its head, but it ducked. It let out this horrible howl that one of those creatures would have been proud of, then raced out of the room. I'd gotten a little braver, and gun in hand, I jumped out of bed and ran after him. But he was now gone. I locked the back and front doors and all the windows for the first time in years, and I stayed in the kitchen all night, keeping watch, gun in hand. At some point, around dawn, I jolted awake, realized I had dozed off. To start with, I wondered if it had been just a bad dream, caused by my worry about Pippa, but I could smell the remnant of gunpowder and burnt hair. And once I saw the hole in my bedroom doorframe and the blood and fur on the floor, I knew there was no imagining that. Thankfully, I got Pippa home the next day, and I have never had any trouble with canine human hybrids again. Just to be sure though, I now always lock up before bed and make certain the gun is fully loaded. And now Pippa sleeps in my bed too. I know this sounds like some crazy horror story, but imagine, I had to actually live through this nightmare. It's been a while now, and so I feel like I've been able to collect my thoughts and cohesively write this down. I'm from Pennsylvania. I have a friend who tells me that he was driving down an old county dirt road when all of a sudden he noticed what he described as two dogs on the side of him. He said to himself, "Why are these dogs out here at 2 a.m? Then, both of them to his terror start to stand up on two legs, and like a man began running towards his truck. In a panic, he speeds up to try and get away from them. But instead, one of these things jumped onto his truck and then fell off. As they passed by each other at high speeds, they both kept up with him. One of these things landed quite close to him and began to chase after him again. So he crested a small hill, and he saw a car up ahead on the other side of the road with its lights on. He slammed on the brakes, jolting forward, and his back tires actually ran over this thing's head. He says he heard this loud whimpering, and then there was nothing but silence. Suddenly, it came up to the side of his truck again, jumping up on top, with one leg, standing there for about 3 seconds holding on, staring at him upside down, then jumping back off again. At this point, he ended up driving straight into town, where he made sure all his doors were locked, and he didn't sleep an entire day because he was too frightened by what he had experienced, that this Dogman would break into his house in the middle of the night. He told me another story involving him when he was 15. This is where he was playing basketball with his friends in a park late at night. And this was also close to where he had his older encounter. He saw two lights shine in the court from what seemed to be by an empty field nearby. He thought nothing of it, and there was nobody out there. However, for some reason, these lights kept getting closer, so close that eventually you could see that they were eyes, and they were glowing this red color. Finally, they came so close to him that one of his friends yelled, "They're coming right at us," and all his friends, including him, ran away, except for one of his friends, who had been frozen with fear. Then this thing lunges out into the court from the darkness. This thing looked very similar to what he saw when he was older. He claims it looked more like an upright coyote, and it stood there staring at them for what seemed like forever, before slowly making their way back into the darkness. And my friend claimed he had never felt fear like that in his entire life. He even says he doesn't know what's scarier, seeing it or thinking about seeing it again when you're home all alone. One day, in the late afternoon, I was driving back to Connecticut from a friend's house who lived in Boston. It was a fairly lengthy drive, and it was getting dark out. The road we were on went through several hills and woods, which had been said by locals to be the home of Dogman. I've heard it many times. Say, when you grow up around friends and family that are supposed cryptozoologists, you hear it all. Bigfoot, Yowie, Dogman, Mothman, you name it. So I never paid much mind to it. But, I guess he's known as being a half-man, half-dog with yellow eyes, supposedly running on all fours, but also is able to stand up like a person. I'm not sure if you've ever heard him before, although I'm sure you have. Anyway, my family had warned me for months about this thing, and before I had ever seen it for myself. I always just thought it was a bunch of hoopla, made up. And they even told me stories of such how they had seen it running on all fours and standing up on two legs. They had heard of it sneaking up on people, attacking them. As much as I didn't want to believe in the creature, I stopped doubting that there was something out there after one of my friends told me about how he got into a car accident. The day we were driving home, we saw what looked like a man-sized dog in the middle of the road ahead of us. It wasn't too dark outside, so you could still clearly see what it was. But at first, we thought it might just be a real dog, until we noticed its stance and height. Then we knew for sure that this wasn't an actual dog, because deer are everywhere out there, and they've always stood still on the side of the road when a car approached them. This thing, now that we know what to call it, started running towards us, and I knew it wasn't just because he wanted to say hi. So I sped up and tried to get away from it. The whole time I was driving, this thing kept pace with us by slightly fading in and out, or appearing behind trees, until finally disappearing completely. As soon as whatever this was went into hiding, we sped off as fast as we could, completely panic-stricken. When we got back to my friend's house, I called the police, told them what was going on. They said if I ever saw something like that again, to just drive away and call 911, assuming that we were being attacked by a wild animal. Not that they believed my Dogman sighting. But yeah, that was my actual sighting. And that, my friends, is actually what changed me from a skeptic to a believer. That means I guess Bigfoot does exist, and all the other plethora of creatures out there. I've heard of this creature before, but never really believed in it until one day last summer of 2019, when me and a few friends of mine were at Lake Tahoe for a camping trip. We ended up staying there for the weekend because bad weather conditions, so we decided to walk around near the lakeshore. It was late at night, and since 2 nights ago, there had been reports from different people saying they had seen something moving up by the water where we were headed towards. On top of all that, it was raining, and we were only going to go for about 20 minutes. We figured it would be fine. By the time we walked 15 minutes out there, it began to get a little foggy because of all the rain. As my friends and I were taking pictures, we heard what sounded like something growling beside us. When we looked over, there was this strange-looking creature standing on its hind legs by a tree. We had no idea what it could have been, probably because the lighting wasn't that great, due to all the fog and rain. Whatever it was terrified me and one of my friends pretty bad, and this thing took off running. Me and another friend of mine ran back to the cabin as well, so we tried to stay behind. I didn't think anything would happen to us until we had started initially walking towards this creature before it ran. It tried to back away, although I took up my phone hoping to get some pictures, but before I could even touch my screen, this thing disappeared. Anyway, when we were back at camp, some of us were in shock. They thought we were just trying to pull an elaborate prank. As crazy as it sounds, me and my friends are still traumatized from what had happened that night, which is why I figured there should be more stories about this creature somewhere online. Since then, whenever I go camping at Lake Tahoe, sometimes I still hear howls at night, coming from different directions, and it makes me wonder if this is related to the werewolf I saw that night. Maybe I'm just going crazy. Look, I've had a lot of scary experiences with this so-called creature, mainly when I was younger. But this one stands out, and that's when I was 16. My friend and I were at her house one night. We were having a sleepover. We had just went to bed when, all of a sudden, something began knocking on our sliding glass door. Scared both of us awake. It sounded loud. It then started scratching on her window, which made us both flip out. It hit the window with what felt like an arm and broke the screen. So then we ran to hide in my car, parked outside. We thought it might be a person who broke into our house or something. She locked herself in my trunk, and I stayed behind the driver's seat. When we realized that whatever this wasn't coming in, we went back in the house to see what had happened. The back window was shattered, and there was this thick hair all over. We knew it wasn't hers because, well, she didn't have any dogs at the time. After that experience, me and my friend decided to never go back around her house after dark. At least, leave the house, I mean. Now, I heard about a tribe called the Jackalopes living where I lived. So naturally, I thought maybe it could be one of them. But I started researching for real sightings and saw what they call the Dogman. Now, I myself have had many strange encounters with these creatures over the years. In Montana, they have these creatures that are considered lesser demons. They apparently can harm you if you try and take a photo of them. However, they are said to be able to turn into a solid cloud of vapor and disappear. And sometimes they can even appear as a black apparition with eyes like fire. Once in the evening, outside my house on my property, I was sitting on the front porch, relaxing, when something large sprinted by me so fast that if I wouldn't have seen it, I wouldn't have believed it. It looked like a large hairy man, covered in 3 to 4 inch brown hair all over its body, except for the face, which was very human looking. He didn't look at all to me to pay attention. He just ran by at full speed and disappeared into the tall grass near my property line. I could hear him pass right by me as he was running, and running into the tall grass. I heard brush and foliage breaking under his weight. He didn't have a tail, and his hands were like a human, with long nails. They looked to be like claws. That's what grabbed my attention initially, besides his size, and the fact that it sounded like somebody running through the yard and just kicked something out of their way. Well, 2 weeks later, I had yet another encounter on a backcountry road, roughly 3 miles away from my house, late at night. It looked like a human, but had black hair all over its body, and appeared to have kind of a snout. The creature reminded me of Alf, if you know what that is. Kind of a short-looking face, very short snout, very small ears. The only reason why it appeared is that it kind of stepped out from the dark in the middle of nowhere, and I was looking at it before it disappeared. But it also kind of looked human because of its posture alone. It never took its eyes off me. They were pitch black, and I stopped about 30 feet away from it. I observed it from where I was standing. It appeared to just stare at me, and then kind of disappear back in the woods. This thing didn't look dangerous or aggressive, more curious, and I'm assuming it smelt me. I've also seen a similar creature, only from inside my car. I'm driving down that same road one evening, again 3 miles from town, and it looked like it was standing upright on 2 legs in the middle of the road, with its back towards me. I couldn't tell what it looked like, except that it had long hair on its upper body, and a little bit lower on its upper half. It stood there for probably 15 seconds before running to an overgrown ditch and disappearing in the tall grass. I believe these creatures are capable of shapeshifting, and I believe I've seen 3 different kinds. I don't know what kind of creatures we're dealing with here, but I know they have to be dangerous, if not at least some. The fact that they run away as soon as they're noticed, or the fact that there's thousands of sightings and encounters with these things over the years, proves to me that we're not dealing with anything human, but some type of paranormal creature. I believe they exist in my area. I've seen one for myself, and apparently, a lot of other people have too.
My older cousin has served time, and not only in the military, but also specific branches of government that deal with things hidden to the public eye. He has gone on several diving missions with other very experienced divers, experiencing strange creatures, and nearly dying, but that's for another story that I'll have to tell you later. He has had other run-ins with things that are not supposed to exist, and it's even had a couple Bigfoot counters here and there. But today, I'm going to be telling you about how he had encountered a Dogman nest, or so he tells me, when he had gotten hired by a secret security firm to survey an area of land due to an unforeseen threat, is what they called it. My cousin had been hired several times by multiple companies as a quote-unquote cleanup person. He's kind of a jack of all trades and has had his hands in quite a few endeavors, including being sent out to kill several mountain lions and packs of coyotes, some that were endangering nearby communities' farms and livestock, but then again, that's not the point of why I'm writing to you. My cousin, see, he refuses to tell me the exact location, but says it's somewhere between Ohio and Kentucky, and that he was in the thick of the wilderness surveying this specific area. My cousin wasn't the type of person to ask questions. Usually, he was just given an assignment and an order, and that was it. He was only given a few basic supplies with his most prized tool on a journey, a machete. He made it to a certain point where he told me that he was able to tell, just by the look of the wilderness alone, that man had never stepped in this area before, and that he was the first human to be in those woods. The further he got in, the thicker the brush got, and the harder it became for him to get in. He told me even the atmosphere around him had started to change in a negative way. When asking him what he meant by that exactly, he could only explain that it got harder to breathe, and he could feel the presence of something else, meaning he was not alone. After continuing on further and further, getting closer to the coordinates he was given, he stumbled upon what looked like a large den, half shallow cavern and half built out of dirt. He said it was just kind of there, and the opening was enormous, around 8 to 9 feet high and about 5 feet in width, and was large enough that he could just basically walk in. He said you could just smell death emanating from every corner of this small cave. Being outside the entrance, you could even smell it more. Even though every fiber in his being was screaming to not go in, he said he felt like there was just this mysterious force pulling him in and drawing him in as if he had no control over his own body. Taking his flashlight on and out and gripping his machete, he made his way about 20 feet when the cavern inside opened up to a much larger area. He said if he had to guess, it was probably about 30 feet high, and a room that's roughly 50 yards across from where he was standing to the back wall. He said the smell of rotting animal and wet dog was so bad that he could hardly breathe, and couldn't be in there long. After quickly shining his light around, there were so many bones, he said. He saw so many skulls and bone piles. Animals, of course. He had no doubt in his mind that this was indeed the den of some large predator, probably a wolf or a pack of wolves. He said he was the only one in there for a handful of seconds because, besides the smell, he had this horrible feeling like he just shouldn't be in there and that he should leave now. Quickly exiting the cave, he made his way another 10 or so miles to the designated coordinates he was given, but said he was followed the rest of the way there. He said he could feel the presence of something quickly growing around him. It felt malicious. It became apparent more and more that he needed to get out of there, and quickly, and reach his coordinates. He explained to me that whatever it was following him, was tracking him like prey, but wasn't coming in close enough to reveal itself. He thought that to be odd, considering whatever it was clearly possessed enough strength and stamina to pounce on him and take him down. He believes that whatever it was also lived in the den that he had discovered, and that there were multiple of whatever this was following him wherever he was going. This went on until he reached his coordinated points where a helicopter had come to pick him up after using a special signalized device. Upon being picked up, and as he was going up in the air, he said he looked down and can see these tall, what he would describe as werewolf-looking beings standing and some were crouching just beyond the woodline, invisible if you were on foot, but totally exposed once you were in the air. Because of how spread apart the trees were in this clearing, since it was obviously big enough for a helicopter to land, he was able to see these beings very clearly. Said there was probably about 7 or 8 of them, and that they were pitch black, and instead on 2 legs, and resembled that of what you would see off of a Hollywood horror movie. Frightened, he did keep it to himself, but he told me that this wasn't his first rodeo, since he has had other strange encounters with weird beings like Bigfoot and other stuff. I'll be sure to send you that story about his diving experience and encountering something unknown. I need to start with telling you that I am a no bullshit kind of person. I don't like to lie or make stuff up, and because of my job, I have to be as honest and credible as possible and maintain somewhat of my integrity. I knew that if I told anybody besides you, and maybe a few other people who are open to this, I would probably be mocked and called crazy, so I figured I would give it a shot by telling you this. You can tell me what you think. You seem to know a lot about it, so maybe you can give me some pointers. I truck for a living, and a couple of months back, I hit and killed an animal that I couldn't identify. I did not stick around long enough to truly get a great look at it because I got the feeling that there were potentially more around the area, and that I may have pissed them off by killing one of their kind. I want to say I was somewhere between Illinois and Iowa, and I could tell you it was a long stretch of road, flatlands, and I was the only truck on the road at the time. It was early in the morning, and it was pitch black outside. I'm driving, and all of a sudden, this large black dog steps out on the road and looks right in my direction. When I say steps out, he steps out onto the road as close to where I was that I did not even have time to stop the truck at all, and all I could do was honk the horn. He was standing on 2 legs. It was too late for that though, and I ended up colliding with whatever this 2-legged humanoid dog thing was. I heard the thud and had to pull over immediately to see what happened. So I pull over to the side of the road where there is barely any room to begin with and put my hazards on and grab my trusty flashlight. I run back there, and lying there on the road is this ugly looking thing. I'll tell you when I ain't ever seen anything that looks like this. This animal was ugly. It reminded me of a dog but looked so human-like it was startling. It wasn't too big. I would say maybe 5 feet high if I had to guess when I saw it. My initial reaction was that it was a child or a teenager in a costume, but that just wasn't the case. This thing was maimed up pretty well for my truck, so I did what most people would do, and kicked it off the side of the road, not thinking too much of it. When I say this thing was ugly, I really mean that. When it died, part of its lower jaw was broken open, exposing all of its sharp, rigid teeth. I remember I gasped at how many teeth that it had, and it was like I was looking into the mouth of a shark, minus the serrated edges on the teeth. It had a shorter snout, but piercing, dull, now lifeless eyes. I sat there and crouched over it, shining my light and scanning over its body to see really what it was and to if I could properly identify what it was I had killed. But I could not. Maybe it was a mutated coyote, or possibly a wolf, but all of its sizes and dimensions were just wrong. Then again, it was maimed pretty good from the truck, and that it was a big, bloody mess. I would say the head was the most intact, and was really the only thing I had to go by trying to figure out what kind of animal this really was. When you and I had spoken about this previously on the phone, you had mentioned to me that it sounded like a Dogman to you, or a juvenile Dogman at that. See, I know virtually nothing about cryptids, or cryptozoology, or creatures that aren't supposed to exist, I should call them, but I can tell you I've never seen an animal that looked this way. The best way I can relay the feeling to you and your viewers, since I'm sure you will be reading this to them, is that it's kind of like seeing a dead lion for the first time if you've only ever seen house cats. You would be confused, amazed, and terrified at the sight of this massive dead animal, but you could tell by somewhat similar relation in size and shape that it was related to a familiar animal that you kind of knew. I think in the moment I probably chalked it up to just a mutated coyote or something, even though it walked out onto the road on two legs. I don't know. I think I was overcome by so much shock about what happened, I didn't really spend too much time with critical thinking. Tried not to get my boot covered in blood, and there really wasn't a good way to push it off the road, so I kinda just left it there. I know, I'm an asshole for that, but what am I supposed to do? I got back in my truck and left, and that's pretty much the end of that. To recap, I would say that when it stepped out onto the road, it seemed startled that my truck was there, and possibly did not know I was on the road so close when he had stepped out, like it was an accident. I maybe got a second to look at it before it looked right over at me, and then BAM! My truck hit this thing, collided, and I assume killed it on impact would be my best guess. A few years ago, in the fall, I had one of those Dogman sons of bitches steal a buck from right outside the back of my truck. Long story short, because I'm not going to feed you a 7-page encounter story, so I'll keep it really brief. Long story short, I got me a 4-pointer, tagged it, and stuck him in the back of my truck. This was a good-sized buck too, and I was going to bring it to my friend who's a taxidermist, because I wanted to keep the hide intact. But I guess that son of a bitch made sure that wasn't going to happen. I'm about 50 feet away from my truck, dealing with my tarps and getting them ready to cover my kill, as I hear my truck sitting down and what sounds like a boulder being thrown onto it, and I turn around and this dog-looking person, a dogman, reaches down from jumping up in the truck, grabs onto the buck with one hand, pulls it up and throws it over its shoulder in one fluid motion, all while turning and jumping into the trees with my kill. I can hardly believe what I just saw, so much so that my mouth was practically on the ground in sheer disbelief. This thing has never looked over at me, and it just grabbed its prize, or, well, my prize that it stole, and bolted into the woods. Of course, I screamed and hollered, but by the time I went to go get my gun out of the cab of my truck, it was long gone. This thing was fast, and I wasn't even afraid of the sheer size and speed of this thing, just pissed the fact that it took all my effort away. A month ago, I went over with my friends to some state gameland area that's near their house to walk around in because, well, we were bored and we're in quarantine, and there's not much else to do. We just wanted to explore miles upon miles of dense, dark woods. I'm 18, and I thought it would be a fairly good idea if I brought weapons with me, and any sort of supplies in case anything happened, because we were just wanting to explore, and also wanting to do it at night, where everything is in the blackness. I would like to think of us as a group of avid explorers. I, personally, love the thrill of being in danger sometimes, and wanted to make sure we were taken care of in case we ran into a cougar or some sort of predator. We got out there pretty far, and we were doing just fine with flashlights and the equipment that we had. We wanted to keep a lookout and make sure that we wouldn't run into any nocturnal animals like skunks or anything like that. The woods that we were traversing through were dense and covered with foliage and short-cut trees, but we were determined to get as much out of the night as we could. And the further we went into the wilderness without anything happening, the braver we became and the hungrier we got for a thrill. At one point or another, we came to a dead deer, a buck at that was partially eaten. It looked fresh too, and we were amazed at the size of this buck and how it was torn open. We got creeped out because that meant there was either a cougar around or a bunch of coyotes, both being something we weren't really wanting to deal with. As we were checking out this carcass with our flashlights and looking at it a little more, We hear a crunching of leaves behind us, and we all shone our lights. The first thing we saw is huge white teeth glistening in the light, and a gaping snout full of dripping saliva. That's when we quickly noticed the glowing amber eyes shortly above it, and that these teeth belonged to whatever it is we were looking at. We were looking at a real-life werewolf in front of us, and we didn't stick around to see what was going to happen. I think we all booked it out of there so fast we probably made a dust storm. We booked it so fast and never looked back to see if this thing was following us, but I don't think it ever did. We got back to our cars and floored it out of there so fast. I used to think that monsters didn't exist, but I feel like that night I was proven wrong. I don't know what the hell is out there that looks exactly like a werewolf, but whatever it was we ran into, I'm sorry this encounter is so brief, but there's not a whole lot to it other than what we saw and that we booked it. I can't give you more specific, exact details because it was just so quick, but I can tell you confidently that all four of us saw exactly the same thing, and we collectively speculate that whatever we saw was in the process of possibly eating this dead buck, or was coming upon the corpse to eat since it was still fresh. I believe it growled at us because it thought we were coming to take its food, or even posed a threat, and we weren't about that life, so we ditched. I was driving home late one night when I saw what looked to be like a large dog or canid-like humanoid thing run across the road in front of me and jumped off the guardrail. The first thing I noticed was a large shape that was standing upright and running on two legs in front of my vehicle, just outside the limits of my headlights. It's been cleared, the road, in only a matter of seconds and leapt off into the night. It was dark and I couldn't make out a fur color, but it looked to be a smoky charcoal color gray, if I could put my best guess in. The first thing I noticed was it to have pointed ears in the snout, which is what ultimately gave it away as canid. The disturbing part was that it was running on two legs, and just like a dog would, bound off the side of the road, off the guardrail, like it would if it was on four legs. I know there is such a thing as wild dogs and all that, but something in my gut just tells me this wasn't a wild dog. It also looked nothing like a wolf or what a wild dog would look like, and it was much larger. Plus, the fact that I don't think any breed of dog can walk steadily on two legs for really any amount of distance, at least not comfortably, without shaking. It freaked me right the hell out, and I kept driving, keeping to my own business, hoping it wasn't planning on coming after me. Never ever ever saw it again after that. So, I've been listening to scary stories and cryptid encounters for years now, and my family has never really believed me, because I myself am a big believer in them, even though I've never had any personal accounts, thank you God. But just recently, my good mate's brother told me about that he ran into one of these dog werewolf things, whatever the hell they are, when he went hunting back in the fall. He told me that he must have got to this buck first before this Dogman did, because, coincidentally, he thinks both him and the same creature were hunting the same buck. He claimed that it was pissed off and showed itself after he killed it, and even tried to go as far as attack him with the intent to kill. He let it take his kill and said he didn't want any part to play in fending that creature off. When I picked his brain about it for proof that he wasn't lying, he got really emotional and started freaking out, and his whole tone of voice changed. There's just a certain genuine and sincerity in somebody's tone when they're recalling a past traumatic experience that you can tell they're not lying. When he described it, he said it was hairy and had a longer snout, and it resembled the werewolves from the underworld movies, is what he told me. Then he says it couldn't have been that though, because he knows that werewolves are fictional creatures and don't exist in the real world. So, what is it that he ran into? I think he ended his speculation with it with some sort of mutated or damaged or deranged wolf, or possibly mange, or even a hybrid. He doesn't know. Okay, I know you know a lot about Dogman, so I'm writing to you, asking for some help, and maybe even your viewers can help me. I have a barn, probably about a quarter-mile away from my house, and for whatever reason, stray cats love my land, and it never fails. Every spring, there always seems to be a new litter of kittens and cats that show up, so I always make it a thing to go out to the old barn and lay out some food and old blankets so they can make themselves a comfy home. I use some of the leftover straw and hay to kind of make it their own. Well, one night it was particularly windy and raining really hard, so I worried about them and wanted to make sure those little guys had plenty of food for the night, since it had been a few days since I checked up on them, and I didn't want them to go hungry or cold. I grabbed my flashlight and I walked out there, and as I get close to the barn, I'm hearing the cat start to go crazy, and I'm thinking to myself, what on earth? As I reach close to the barn, the door of it flings open, and this short, stubby little Dogman, no more than 4.5 feet tall, runs out and stares at me right in the face like a deer caught in the headlights kind of look. I noticed immediately the dead cat in its mouth and 2 more in its hands. It just stares at me for a quick second, not moving a muscle, as if frozen, like caught up doing something that it shouldn't. While holding on to all 3 dead cats, it flies down onto all 4s and sprints off into the darkness far beyond the barn. Without even hesitating, I run into the barn to make sure the cats are okay, and there are a few missing, which wasn't too abnormal. They come and go at night and day, but in all, there is around 8 or so, and I was only seeing about 4 during this time. Usually, this time of night is when they all congregate in the barn and sleep, so I don't know if they're from the same litter or what, but either way, their numbers continue to shrink after that. The lowest the number got was probably 1 or 2 cats that I ever kept seeing, and the other ones kind of just disappeared after that. But like I said, there was always at least 1 or 2 cats around no matter what. I don't know for sure if that Dogman saw that it was a free meal and broke in or what. I want to hunt that thing down, but if it's a young one, that means there's probably a mom and a dad somewhere close by, and I really don't want to feel parental wrath because I obliterated their child with a 12 gauge for going after my cats. Anyway, I want to mention to you that I've had a few other encounters with Dogmen, which is why I know about them, and for whatever reason, there's this connection between me and them now, to where I encounter them on somewhat of a timely basis. It's very strange. It's like once you see one or have an encounter with one, or more than encounter, it's like once you see one or have an encounter with one, more encounters will follow suit, and I'm not sure why that is. I had an absolutely terrifying dinner over at my girlfriend's parents' house just a few years ago. My girlfriend's parents live out in the high desert, and near their house, there is a large canyon that feeds into a smaller river down at the bottom. Since it is high desert, there's lots of locust trees, mild brush, and it's fairly open with only minor tree coverage. I know sometimes they will get coyotes and possibly even mountain lions, but I don't really know what else. I mention these things to you because I'm not exactly sure what we encountered that night. Whatever it was spooked the hell out of my girlfriend and her parents and I. It hasn't happened since to my knowledge, but either way, it was quite the experience. So, we are over for dinner, having a great time socializing with her parents, and we had just finished having dessert. We're sitting around her living room talking when we begin to hear coyotes off in the distance. We all just sit there quietly, and I mentioned to her father that, wow, the coyotes are really acting up tonight, I see. And he just kind of chuckles and says, yeah, you'll hear them quite often, and they'll usually yip and yap from time to time. About 3 or so seconds later, we all heard the most powerful and horrific wolf howl we have ever heard. Or at least that's the closest animal we could attach it to. It sounded like a wolf howl, but on steroids. It was so loud. We all looked at each other confused when her father and I both, at the same time, said, "What the hell was that?" and we get up to try and look out the window, but nothing. It sounded so close by, but it's so dark outside, and her parents only have seldom lights around their property. I asked him if there's any wolves around here, and he said there hasn't been any for a long time. But he said that howl sounded like it came from something bigger than a wolf. This is where things get even creepier. We continue on with the night and conversation, and probably a good 15 or 20 minutes later, that pack of coyotes was much closer to the house. This time, they started to go off in a crying, crazy frenzy, whimpering in a giant chorus of coyotes. Her dad and I were bamboozled at what the hell we were hearing, and so both of us stepped outside to see if we can get any sort of clue or inkling to what was going on. But nothing. We could tell that these coyotes were often in the woodline, whooping and hollering and making all sorts of racket. We figured that they had gotten a kill, which is why all the commotion was going on around the distant. But this sounded different than your typical coyote whooping and hollering. They were afraid and crying, yipping and yapping and whining. It was strange and very disturbing to say the least. Her father and I stood outside listening for some time, with my girlfriend begging us to come back in, and that she did not feel safe, while me and him tried to comfort her, telling her it was all right. It went quiet after a while, and we sat there, talking, trying to speculate what it was we were hearing exactly and what was going on. I found it fascinating, even though I was a little creeped out, I'm not gonna lie. That's when all the hairs on my head and arms started to stand up, like I felt like I was in danger. Once again, her father broke the silence and said, "Do you feel that?" And I said, "What?" He said, "We need to go inside now. We're being watched." Without hesitating, I took both steps inside the house and asked him, by what? And I'll never forget the way he looked me in the eyes with the most stern and serious expression, and just told me, "I don't know." The rest of the night, my girlfriend and I just sat down and watched some Netflix to try and forget about the whole thing. I'm not too sure what her father and mother did, but I'm assuming they kept busy inside, because neither of them went back out. I think things quieted down or so, I think. The next morning, her father woke me up in a daze and said, "You gotta come see this now." Still dazed and groggy from waking up on a funky REM cycle spot, my girlfriend and I stumbled up out of bed to see what her dad was talking about. All along the large pasture, just a little ways out from their house in perfect view, was a clear view of this coyote bloodbath. There were dead coyotes strung all throughout the field. We all said a few choice words that I'm not going to repeat, but you can guess them. We ran out to the field to properly assess the damage, and we noticed that these coyotes had literally been torn to pieces. I'm not talking about just one or two coyotes. I'm talking about at least a dozen or so, it looked like. There were more chunks of flesh and meat than there were whole coyotes. I don't have an explanation for what happened, but I know it really bothered my girlfriend's father, based on his reactions and him kind of shutting down for the rest of the day. I had to pitch in and give him a hand on cleaning up that mess, and what a shit show that was, but we got it done. I really don't have an explanation for what happened, and I kinda just like to play it off as an overly aggressive mountain lion that got too close to those coyotes over food or something, but I'll never really know. Plus, there's really no explanation for that loud howl that we heard. I'm just thankful that I don't have any of that where I live, and I don't have to deal with it. This was back in the early 2000s when I would go and visit my uncle and grandfather, and my uncle would take me on rides on his motorcycle out in the back country. They lived out in Minnesota and had miles upon miles of beautiful backcountry roads that were sparsely traveled. It made great for riding around on a motorcycle. I have so many fond memories with me and my uncle, going riding for 30 minutes to an hour in the evening, just enjoying the wind blowing against your face. There were several times that we had a few bull elks here and there. That was pretty cool to see. I saw more deer more times than I can count, but I kind of figured that's usual for being out and about in the countryside. However, that was all ruined for me one night when my uncle decided to take me on a night motorcycle ride. He had never taken me during the nighttime, so I was ecstatic for the adventure. Plus, he told me he was going to take me on a different route than he normally takes. This excited me even more so. Oh, I should probably mention that I was only about 9 years old at the time, so I was still very young and very impressionable. We get on his bike and we're going off. He starts to take us down some roads that I wasn't too familiar with, and they trailed off and forked off of our usual routes that we would sometimes take. I was having the time of my life, even though there were hardly if any streetlights around, because hey, we're on the backcountry, and it was darker than dark. But I felt safe with my uncle. It's hard to say how long we were riding for before it happened, but at some point down one of the roads, my uncle and I turned our attention to this loud crashing sound to the right of the road, just as we were passing it. It sounded like one of those Tomcat construction workery machineries that people drive around. It was so loud, and I remember thinking, is construction going on right now, this late at night? Just as we were passing, and I promise you on this, and I don't want you to think I'm crazy, the trees open up, and this large demon thing bolts out on all fours, begins sprinting after us on our motorcycle. I am screaming bloody murder, and my uncle kicks it into high gear, and we go soaring down the road. Of course, I was behind him, so I really had no idea how fast we were going, but if I had to guess, maybe 80 or 90 miles an hour. Whatever was chasing us was keeping up with us and was slowly inching closer and closer. I don't know what the hell it was, but the closest comparison I can make is if you've ever seen the Van Helsing movie. I think it came out in 2003. At the very end, he fights off Dracula and turns into this massive, monstrous wolf-looking creature. What I saw looked very similar in size and stature. The face was very similar to a giant snout full of crocodilian-like teeth. It had a sort of dog glow in the eyes, kind of like a red-orange color. It looked to me like somebody crossed a crocodile and a wolf with a splash of human and demon. This thing was hulking in size and dwarfed not only me, but my uncle and the bike. If I had to guess, I would say it was around 7 feet tall on all fours, with the head as big as my uncle, or so it seemed. It chased us for a minute, and then got extremely close to the bike, like it was going to reach out and grab us, but then it just jumped right off into the woods and vanished, just like that. I was still screaming and hysterical until we got back to his house. What happened that night was one of the most traumatic things to have happened in my life. I had to undergo therapy for a while, and it really messed me up seeing something like that. I think my uncle even gave up on his motorcycle license for a while, but I didn't really talk to him about it or knew how he felt. After that, I didn't ride with him on his bike anymore, and I kind of shut down for a while. I stopped going over there, and a few years later, I would come to find out that my uncle had a massive heart attack. It's a shame because I was close with him at the time. I guess I should have found out how he's come to terms with everything, but I'll never know now. I just wish I knew what it was. I don't think it was any known animal that I've ever seen or heard of. And when I say hulking and demonic looking, I mean it. This thing came straight out of hell, and you could just feel the evil emanating off of it. I have never felt such fear in my life. I also think that part was due to the fact that I believe it was toying with us. This thing was so massive, it could have caught up to us and ripped us both off the bike and eaten us right there. As it kept up with us and acted like it wasn't even breaking a sweat or trying to keep close. It's almost as if it just wanted to let us know that it could get us anytime it wanted, and we were helpless. I can't shake those feelings. I don't know what you want to call it, whatever it is I encountered that night, but I will tell you it was evil, and I don't wish that for anybody, ever. So, I've been a big follower of your channel for some time now, and have never had any cryptid encounters myself, or anything strange. As you know, everything has been shut down with the quarantine lately. That is, until just a few days ago when they opened up hunting. Well, everything else is still pretty shut down, but that's my one solace, and just in time for turkey season. Where I live, there's actually a few groups of turkeys traversing around the area. In fact, this area is so popular for turkey hunting that it's not uncommon that every year I have people that pull up to my property asking me if they can hunt. With the season opening back up, I've been really wanting to get me a big tom for some time now, and was worried that the season would never open back up. The only issue that I have is that I haven't seen the groups of turkeys that I saw last year. What's even more disturbing is the other day when I was walking around, I found several dead turkeys that weren't whole, if you know what I mean. I'm talking turkeys being ripped into pieces. Not all of them, and surprisingly, some of the girls or female turkeys that I have found with their heads completely torn off. Yesterday, about half a mile away from my house, I found a big tom that would have been perfect, but his insides had been ripped out entirely, and his neck was broken in half. It was a mess, but there was no blood. That's the weird thing. And I noticed also very large canine tracks. I know for a fact we don't have wolves, only coyotes at most. Well, mountain lions, of course. The neighbors around here don't have any dogs that I'm aware of, and I've been here for years now, so I believed I would have seen them. Plus, I live on private property, and I've never seen a dog here before. I could take a picture of the tracks because they are rather large, and I'm not saying it's a Dogman, but it's really similar how everything I hear from your channel matches up with everything that I'm experiencing and seeing in person. Mutilated cadavers and large canine prints. It's just a red flag for me. I have not heard a single gobble gobble, or any sort of sign that there are live turkeys around my area, which, again, deeply disturbs me. Every May is usually full of turkeys, and there are plenty to go around, but not this year. Something has been killing them off, and there are no natural predators that I know of that would just mutilate a turkey with good meat on it and leave it. Think about it. A mountain lion wouldn't just leave a cadaver like that. And a pack of coyotes, well, the cadaver would disappear. Even wolves. No predator that I know of is this messy and kills for the sake of killing. Again, I'm not saying this is definitively a Dogman, but I just find it really creepy now that there's such a striking similarity between what I hear and what I'm actually seeing with my own eyes. I should reiterate that the canine tracks are enormous. I haven't measured exactly, but my whole hand can fit inside the print. There didn't look like there had been much of a struggle on the turkey's end, and like I said, no blood either, which is so strange. I have not heard anything at night or during the day that would lead me to believe that I have a Dogman problem. I have not heard any silence in the woods, nor have I felt anything weird, nor have I seen any weird shadows darting around the woods. I'll just have to keep my eyes and ears open and attentive to my area and let you know. Maybe other people have caught on by this point of the year, and so I've already had at least 3 to 4 people pull up and ask me if it's okay. This year so far, I've had 0. The quarantine might have something to do with all this, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll just have to keep you updated. I know this last summer, I encountered something paranormal and out of this world, but I'm not exactly sure what it would be. My friend and his family are convinced it's a skinwalker, but I believe it was something else. I do know a little bit about skinwalkers and Dogmen, and Bigfoot too, and I don't believe what I encountered was everything that matches up to what a skinwalker is. My friend's family thoroughly believes that this was the spirit or being that represents a skinwalker, and well, I believe it was a Dogman, or potentially a Dogman spirit. Last July, I went and visited a close friend of mine who is native and lives on the Navajo reservation. We've been friends for years and met during a work retreat long ago. I thought I would make a vacation out of it by going to visit him. I stayed with him at his trailer for about a week or so, and then I went with him to go visit his family. His family is very enriched in Navajo culture and lore, and his mother especially can be very superstitious at times, but as of this event, I don't blame her for anything she believes or doesn't believe, or so I thought. My Navajo friend never really talked about skinwalkers or cryptids or anything that goes bump in the night. I guess I can't blame them, since it is a part of their culture not to talk about those things in fear of drawing them to you. I truly don't know how my friend felt about all that stuff because, well, he never really talked about it. When I met his family, which this was the first time, and they were very nice and lovingly invited me into their home to stay. His mom pulled me aside and warned me of her brother that had turned to the darker side of things and would sometimes appear around here at night just to start trouble. I didn't really understand what she meant by that, and at the time I thought she was just referring to him being a lowlife and a drunk and wanting to cause drama, so I left it at that. It's not like I haven't encountered my fair share of bums before. I never really asked my friend about his family, or anything like that, so, to my knowledge, my friend's uncle was nil. We stayed there for a few nights, and everything was as normal as you can get. On one of the nights, all of us were outside having a bonfire, talking, laughing, and eating good food, just like we had the nights before, when after a short time, my friend and his family began to get really quiet, and the laughing, good times and all, turns into a serious, stoic expressions. It was in that moment that I remember I could feel a shift in the mood and tonality around us. I don't know how else to describe it to you, but that's the best way I can. My friend and his family spoke together in Navajo in hushed tones, and I didn't understand a drop of that language, so I left trying to interpret the tone and demeanor as to what was being spoken about. After everybody got quiet, my friend started talking to his family, and they're very concerned. It was almost as if they were trying to conceal their voices from maybe not only me, but something else. At the time, I thought they were just trying to conceal their voice from me, but who knows. My friend turns around and walks up to me and says we need to go back inside the trailer right now. Confused, I thought we were having a good time, but he just keeps walking to the trailer and quickly keeps motioning for me to follow him, so I kind of just shrugged my shoulders, going along with whatever was happening. His dad was trying to put the fire out quickly, and Mom was rushing both me and my friend into the house. We got to the house, and the mother kept looking out the window, waiting for the father to run back up into the house. The father goes in and grabs the gun, and all the doors and windows become locked thoroughly. Now I'm starting to freak out just a little bit because I wanted to know what's going on. Normally, you wouldn't have fires out here at nighttime for fear that it may draw in terrible, terrible spirits. But I guess in this case, looking back, they had their whole property and family and house blessed, so they had weekly bonfires. Well, more like nightly, since they didn't have to worry about those kinds of things. Or so I thought. My friend comes up to me and whispers in my ear that his uncle is outside, and it's going to cause problems. I looked at him strangely and asked if he was drunk, and that we needed to call the police. That's when I heard its super loud bang on the trailer. The mom and father both shrieked, and the dad put his back up against the front door with a gun ready in his hands. At this point, I'm starting to freak the hell out, because I don't know what the hell is going on, but whatever it is feels ominous as hell. You could start to hear these heavy footsteps walking around the trailer outside, and heavy breathing. It didn't sound human. It had a There was so much gruff to the voice. Whatever it was, whoever it was pacing the trailer slowly, as if looking for a weak spot to try and break in. That's what it felt like to me, and I was becoming scared, terrified more likely. My friend and his family kept motioning me to be quiet and to listen, and this went on for probably a good 45 minutes, if I had to guess, but it is hard to say, because time feels like it's an eternity when you're in the moment. After a while, things got quiet for another little bit of time. Dad looked at us all and said we needed to leave the house now to be safe. With gun in hand, he motions for all of us to run outside and jump in their old van and flee. Me, still not knowing exactly what is going on, I'm kind of left with no choice but to tag along and to go with the flow, so scaredy cat me runs out with them and hops in the van. As his dad is basically throwing us in the back of the van, I heard the most horrifying screech or roar that I've ever heard from behind the trailer, just off a little ways in the darkness. It sounded like a mix of a bear, crossed with a wolf, crossed with a dying woman being murdered. It sounded like it came from the pits of hell. I think that was the point in the night where I really felt true fear go down my spine. I felt like I was in danger. My friend and his mother were pale, and the mother was starting to cry, praying in Navajo. His dad is swearing in Navajo, and he's trying to get the van to start. I think it was an old beater van that had problems with the ignition, and it had issues starting up sometimes, if I remember correctly. I think I do remember at one point, though, my friend mentioned that they needed to have the whole engine replaced, but didn't have the money. Anyway, he gets the van going, and we're flying out of there onto the main highway. Now at this point, remember, it's nighttime. There ain't no lights around, except the stars outside. He's doing probably close to 70, maybe 80 miles an hour, and he's flooring it, trying to get away from where we just were. And we're all quiet in the back. Nobody's saying a word. When my friend looks up and looks out the window of the back of the van, he starts screaming and pointing and shouting something in Navajo. I look, and catching up with the van is the largest wolf I've ever seen in my life. I guess I could call it that because it resembled a wolf, but it looked so much more evil. It's like a wolf that came from hell, and it had kind of a smoky vapor to it, if that makes any sense. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's almost like it had black smoke emanating from it, and it had glowing red eyes and large teeth, like some sort of saber-toothed wolf or something, and it was massive. It was running on all fours and getting closer and closer to the van. We're all watching in horror, and then this thing just darts off to the right of the van and increases its speed to not only keep up with the van, but keep up on the driver's side window. And at this point, it's right next to the dad, and he's keeping up at about 80 miles an hour. We're all screaming. His dad pulls off of a fork in the road that was conveniently, thank you Lord, just a little bit ways off of where we were in that moment. The road is a little bit more rough, but he decided to go down that way to try and ward off the thing or whatever was chasing us. While he starts going down this road, the next thing is that this thing just disappears. It's a more primitive road, but by primitive, I mean it still has concrete and stuff, just hasn't been taken care of. So there's potholes and parts of the road that are severely cracked and damaged. We go down this road for I don't even know how long, maybe an hour, but that might be a bit of a stretch. At one point, he just pulled over and parks the van in the middle of nowhere in the pitch black of night. He sits there and just starts sobbing against the wheel. A grown native man sobbing. My friend and his mother didn't say a word, and I'm not even sure what was going on. I'm trying to process what just happened, and there was some freakish demon wolf thing chasing the van the size of a car. I kind of blacked out, to be honest. I felt like it was so traumatic, my brain just had to escape and register that I really wasn't in reality anymore. My memory is kind of fuzzy, but I can tell you that we did end up sleeping in that van. It wasn't comfortable, I can tell you that, but I think we were just all so exhausted from sheer fear. I have no idea why it stopped following us and why his dad just pulled over to the side of the road, leaving us all vulnerable. But whatever it was, we didn't see it after we pulled off. I remember opening my eyes and it being daylight, or at least just starting to see the sunlight come out, with his dad outside of the van looking around. My friend and his mom were still asleep, and the dad just hops back in the van, turns the van on, and begins to turn back around to where their home was. I was exhausted and still terrified, but I didn't have the energy to ask what had just happened. Somewhere along the way home, my friend and his mother had woken up from their slumber, and we all just kind of sat there in silence, in trauma from the night before. At one point or another, we pulled back into their house and were all getting out of their van when the dad and mom walk up to the house and start talking nervously again in Navajo and praying, dropping to their knees. There were deep scratches all over the house and door. It looked like several Kodiak bears tried to maul their trailer. It was bad. My friend is trying to calmly talk to his parents as best as he can, and they're both so worked up they can't even think straight. My friend comes to me and pulls me aside and tells me we should leave, that it's not safe to be here anymore. I wasn't going to argue or try to ask questions. I just went along with everything, and gladly so. In the last 12 hours, I felt my life had flipped upside down entirely. We left, and the rest of the visit wasn't the same at all. My friend had completely shut down and didn't really speak much. Fast forward a little bit, and I was able to finally talk to him and what had happened that night. This is where things get a little creepy, and I really started connecting the dots. Turns out my friend's uncle at a young age murdered his little brother, or in this case, my friend's mother's youngest brother, whom at the time was a small child. This in turn caused him to be banished, and he took and turned to dark magic, becoming a skinwalker. They had a name for it that they called it, but I can't remember it. Basically, a skinwalker. Her brother became animalistic in nature, living in the wild and turning to evil. He had tried to come back, time to time, to torment his sister and my friend's family, taking the shape of hideous beings and animals. This is why they believed him to truly be a skinwalker. However, it gets more terrifying than this. That night in July, when we experienced what we did, it was later found out that her brother, whom had turned to evil practices, committed suicide in a satanic ritual of sorts that same evening. This led to further speculation that this was the actual evil spirit whom dwelled in his mom's brother, had come to enact revenge on the family for banishing years before. That's what he and their family believes now. Why it stopped following us in the van after some time is also another interesting story. I guess it just so happens that not too much further down the road, where his dad had pulled off, lived a medicine man in the community whom had much of the area blessed and had warded off dark spirits before in the past. This friend of mine, whom I won't name for respect of him and his family, claimed dark spirits were afraid of him. All the pieces started to connect more and more as time went on. Myself, I'm not really sure what to think or believe. I know their entire culture is very enriched in that sort of thing, and warding off bad spirits, but this was on a whole other level. I didn't think spirits or demons, call them whatever you will, could take physical form like what I saw, and chase down a van at 80 miles an hour. I do watch creepypasta stuff, and things on Dogman, Bigfoot, etc., so to see this in real life was more than terrifying. It was as if I was in a horror movie. It sure as hell resembled a Dogman of sorts from what I could see out of the back of the van, but by resembling, I mean it just looked huge, hulking, like a hulking satanic saber wolf thing. I don't have an answer for you, but it caused me to shut down for weeks until I could finally talk about it with my friend and get some closure on what exactly happened and why. Maybe it was the spirit that dwelled in his uncle that came and attacked us. I have no idea. My friend and his family had prayed heavily for me in Navajo since I was there with them, as this happened so as to not attract any more of these things. They firmly believe that once you have a sighting with one of these, you become marked for more encounters. His parents had had their house blessed multiple times before this happened, in fear that her brother would return and seek revenge on her, as he had tried before. My friend had told me that this was the reason why this spirit or being wasn't able to enter their house, because it had been blessed by that medicine man. I know that skinwalkers and dark spirits are very much a part of Navajo and are very real. I couldn't imagine what it would be like dealing with these things on a normal basis. This almost makes me question what the definitive line is that really separates cryptids from spiritual beings. Are dogmen spiritual beings at all? Or are they just demons masquerading in physical form? After sitting on all of this for quite some time now, I've come to the possible conclusion that maybe dogmen are just spirits taking physical form and going after people, which is kind of what they do anyway. I could keep going on, but I'll end this and say that no, I don't believe this was a skinwalker. I believe it was a dogman in some way, shape, or form, regardless if it was a spiritual or flesh and blood being. I think there is more to generality in cryptids being spiritual beings more than we would like to think of, with all the ties to opening up portals to other dimensions and seeming to always not be around when we're looking for them. If you want to count the lack of blood trails from when they are shot, well, that's a whole other ballpark to get into. Besides, whatever chases a van down for as long as it did possessed supernatural power in its own right, and I know that no flesh and blood being alone, or at least just an animal, could have done that.